If your job at a healthcare facility includes disinfecting against viruses, you know prevention is the best medicine, and maintaining healthy spaces starts with a healthy cleaning routine. Grainger's world-class supply chain helps ensure you have the quality products you need when you need them, from disinfectants and cleaning supplies to personal protective equipment, so you can help deliver a clean bill of health. Call 1-800-GRAINGER, click Grainger.com, or just stop by. Grainger, for the ones who get it done.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman. Our guest today, fascinating topic. We had a lot of trouble getting through to this guy, too, which always makes you worry. Tim Tolka is the author of the book Blue Mafia, Police Brutality and Consent Decrees in Ohio. And it's about a big, giant federal investigation that went on regarding police brutality in Steubenville and Warren, Ohio. Tim Tolka, are you there?
Yes, I'm here.
And we're lucky to have you, right? We almost didn't have you. We just went through some cartwheels to get this guy on the show. Tell us about yourself. Who is Tim Tolka?
So I'm a writer and researcher from the Midwest. I spent a lot of years traveling around the country and around the world. I'm really interested in institutions and corruption and abuse of power. And that's why I wrote the book. I don't have a particular axe to grind against police. I think a lot of people who have power abuse it. And so, yeah, my first book was about police, and now I'm working on other books and screenplays. But that's what I'm about.
And the first book being Blue Mafia, Police Brutality and Consent Decrees in Ohio. Or is there one previous to that? Let me ask you a question now. You're down in Mexico. Did you wind up down in Mexico? And why did you wind up down in Mexico?
I've always had a connection to Mexico. I lived on the border when I was a child, and I studied here as a college student. And Mexican people are really nice. It's cheap to live here. I was living in San Francisco, and I lived in New York, San Francisco, and D.C. for about 15 years. And after paying those rents for that much time, I really like paying lower rent and having pretty much the same amenities and culture at my fingertips here in Mexico City.
So there's really a significant difference in rent?
Oh, absolutely. Oh, my God.
I'm kidding, man.
It's amazing.
I'm from New York. I'm from New York City. And my daughter is up in D.C. now at college, so I know, trust me, I know the difference. And I spent a lot of time down in Mexico, too, as well.
Yeah.
What's the book about? What do we find in this book?
So it's kind of the autobiography of a civil rights lawyer, It's a biography of a civil rights lawyer who is fighting two police departments who have allegations of brutality going back decades. And one of my favorite things about the book is these two police chiefs who were in charge of these problematic police departments. They are colorful. They're like anti-institutionalists who are in charge of an agency, and they're just wild. One of them threatens a journalist. His name's John Mandopoulos, the chief of the Warren police. And the news in these two cities, Steubenville and Warren, is surreal. Their history is like really fascinating. It goes, mafia influence from as early as the steel industry started. Steel and football are like, religion and economy in these two towns. And now steel is pretty much gone. And so they've had a difficult transition. They've basically been deindustrialized. And so my book is kind of like a local history, but it's also this lawyer's story. in trying to trying to be part of the reform of these two police departments.
And you're saying that the local news media is covering this up?
The news media in the two towns are very, very different. In Steubenville, there's the Herald Star, and they are basically like a glorified mom and pop, bake sale reporting service. They don't do much investigating. You can give them information and they won't touch it. In Warren, there's the Tribune Chronicle, which is owned by Tribune Media, I believe, but they're owned by different people than the Herald Star, and they have a little bit more leeway. They're more interested, they're more investigative. But the real reporting powerhouse in Steel Valley was the Vindicator. And now the Vindicator is kaput. They went out of business like a year or two ago. And so there's not much reporting happening in these towns now, sadly. But during the 90s and the 2000s was when the police brutality was in a kind of a crescendo in these two towns. And there was some great investigative reporting happening in Warren, but pretty much nothing happening in Steubenville.
Yeah, that's terrifying. If people don't support, local reporting, then what can happen in darkness is 10 times worse than what will happen when we're able to shine a little light on this, what's going on.
It's so true.
Yeah, it's terrifying.
National media and even state media have no interest in these areas. You can go to them with really, really dire, grave allegations, and they won't even respond. Like the Columbus Dispatch, the Cleveland Scene, the Plain Dealer. These guys are so overwhelmed, and they don't do a very good job anyway. In my opinion, they don't dig into things nearly as much as they need to, and those are the only ones. It's like a blackout. In the rural areas, you just forget about it. If something happens to you in the rural area, nobody cares. Warren is rated as one of the top 10 worst places to live in the United States. And it's the police brutality, especially during the 2000s while John Mandopoulos was in charge. It was affecting white, black, it was affecting everybody, men, women. It didn't matter. Even if your dad was a cop, you could still get beaten up by the police in this town for nothing, nothing serious, no crime, just look at him wrong. And Mandopoulos refused to investigate. He refused to investigate misconduct claims against his officers, and it was the same story in Steubenville. And it goes to show you that you can't paint victims with a broad brush. When somebody says, "Oh, a police officer beat me over the head," you can't just look at their past or their actions that day. You have to have a camera that's on the cop. You need witnesses. It's very difficult to dismiss allegations of brutality, but it also can be very difficult to prove them. It's really a pickle. Now that there's cameras involved so often, it's revolutionized the investigations clearly.
Well, let me ask you a couple of questions. Like these towns, Steubenville and Warren, are these large towns? What's the population?
About 18,000, 30,000.
Okay, I would consider that very small.
Yeah. They've also lost population during the economic decline. But people think that, in small towns that police brutality is not a problem because everybody knows each other. And, it's one thing that there's this. So the possibility of accountability happens first at the local level, then the state level, and then the federal level. You can file a local complaint with your police chief or your, prosecutor. If they don't give you a remedy, you can file a civil rights lawsuit that'll go to a federal court. And if that doesn't work, you can beseech the Attorney General of the state. And if all of those remedies fail, then you can go to the Department of Justice Civil Rights Division. And it used to be that the Civil Rights Division would come and investigate any claims if there was a kind of confluence of evidence, meaning civil rights settlements, press coverage about police brutality, reports from credible sources, and, whatever evidence comes out of all those, like, for example, Rodney King, the beating and the video was what spurred this law, the Violent Crime Control Act of 1994, which gave the Justice Department jurisdiction over local police departments if there was enough evidence to believe there was, probable cause that there was a pattern of brutality and misconduct. And in both Steubenville and Warren, the civil rights lawyer in my book, Richard Olivito, was instrumental in bringing all these allegations to the attention of the Department of Justice, and even collaborating with the investigators when they came to Steubenville. Lesser extent in Warren, they had a different point person there to help them with the investigation.
Now, let me ask a question about Olivito. Now, was he a local attorney in Steubenville?
Yes, he was born there.
And it's very rare, okay, when you have these kind of cases, 'cause I do these cases too, okay? We have one in Vegas right now, Byron Williams, who was killed by the police. And it's you don't want to hire a local attorney. You want to get someone from out of the jurisdiction, because the local attorneys are usually too afraid to go up against the DA's office and go up against the police department and stuff like that. But you're saying Olivito was not worried about these complications that could come with taking on a case like this?
He got into it by degrees, and as he was attacked publicly, he doubled down in his support of these victims, and basically he became like a soldier for brutality victims in Steubenville and then later in Warren. But it came at tremendous personal cost. He was arrested many times, for spurious charges, imprisoned various times, not only by the police but by judges that he pissed off. He was the Ohio Supreme Court investigated him over a signature violation that did not harm his client, and they suspended him from the practice of law and called him insane. And it was all the evidence of this was very, very flimsy. They tried to do everything to take away his license. The Supreme Court was out for blood, and they couldn't take away his license, so they suspended him and kind of tried to discredit him. But there were already judges that had tried to call him crazy too. And it's a bunch of hogwash, to put it mildly. The man had no blemish on his record, and they were unable to find anything resembling attorney misconduct. They trumped up the charges, and they took away his license, and he's still trying to get it back today.
Wow.
But it was retaliation for his embarrassment of these two police departments, because the Supreme Court started investigating him after the second investigation became public.
And you said this action that caused him to lose his law license was over a signature?
Yeah. He forged his client's signature in order to get a document filed, but it resulted in no financial loss to the client, which it was a bankruptcy situation. So if the Supreme Court found that there was damage to the client's finances, then they would be able to claim that this was attorney misconduct. But there was no financial damage to the client. It's like, what are you punishing him for? For 3 years you're investigating him. It's like, come on, man.
Well, let me ask you this. How was this signature discrepancy discovered? Like, who made a complaint about this?
The client did.
Oh, really? Okay. And
the client has to.
Yeah. And who helped the client make this complaint? Because if you just make a regular complaint against the bar with the bar association, it has to be done professionally by another lawyer who really knows what he's doing. Otherwise, they just ignore this stuff.
So the local bar association investigated the signature, and at the time, Olivito had like 5 pending civil rights cases. And he was trying to emphasize to the investigator that there was, kind of collateral damage if his law license is taken away over something so unimportant as a signature violation when there was no financial damage to the client. And the local bar investigator, who was, I believe, the then president of the Mahoning Bar Association, he thought that this was suspicious, that Olivito was trying to cover something up. And they never found anything, other than this one violation of a signature. And they really made a huge deal out of it. I mean, there are attorneys in big firms that, defraud nursing homes and, steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from their clients. And if they work at a firm that's big, like Boris Sater or what's the other big one? It'll come to me in a minute. The Supreme Court will come out swinging in their defense. But if it's a small solo firm, they'll go after them with everything they got. They are too afraid to take on the big firms. And you see this all over different, agencies that do kind of professional investigations, professional ethics. They always target the small fish who can't defend themselves, so that they can get easy wins and justify their existence.
Give us an idea. What atrocities did Mr. Olivito come across that made him become such a crusader and finally bring justice to this town?
So in Steubenville, the police had a habit of false arrests and seizures of property, as well as brutality and a little maybe taking free blowjobs from the sex workers in the town, which was renowned as a red light kind of town. You had gambling that was supposed to be, illegal, but it wasn't unofficially. And then you had prostitution, which was basically like a big business for the area. And it was very much happening under the noses of everybody in authority with their knowledge and consent. So sex workers were being taken advantage of by the police. There were many allegations of this. Sometimes they'd turn up dead, and that had been going on for 50, 60 years. Then you had the brutality against white, black, poor, anybody, and everybody. There was one case in the 80s where a man parked in front of a police officer's house, and the police officer came out and beat the crap out of him and hit him with his billy club various times for parking in front of his house.
Were these police chiefs elected or appointed, like in the case of this Mendopoulos?
Appointed. And often with like family connections, and then later like nepotism. So Mendopoulos, for example, he had his godson as one of their prized police officers. And his godson, whose name was Chucky List, also ran a racist bar where blacks weren't allowed.
Really? And
the guy would drink and drive so much that he led his own department on a chase. And his own fellow officers had to pull him over driving drunk, and he ran away from them. And then they didn't want to say his name into the radio, so they just said his badge number.
Oh, my God.
And this was the kind of stuff that was going on all the time. Like covering up misconduct, covering up murders. The police would kill somebody and be like, oh, I thought he had a gun or a knife. In Warren, one of the police officers shot another cop, in a moment of confusion. They were just very badly trained. When they showed up, that's when the chaos started. One time they showed up at a wedding, and they ended up like tasing the groom or something. It was like the wildest stuff that you could ever imagine. They even got in a fight. Like 2 police officers got in a fight when they showed up to break up a fight at a wedding. You know, it was just like a comedy show. And but you know, a lot of people were being hurt. People were dying. You know, you're in a room with a cop, and 3 minutes later you suffocated. You know, it's like, what happened? And you could never find out. You know, people couldn't get answers because the police chiefs, both McCartney in Steubenville and Mandopoulos in Warren, were vocally opposed to admitting that their officers would ever do anything wrong, especially people like their own relatives, you know, who they had hired and protected. And all the people in the town knew about it, but they just couldn't do anything because you can't fire a police chief. It's very difficult. They have various appeals. They go to the Civil Service Board, which is usually like their friends, you know.
And you know what the amazing thing, too, in these towns, because you hear these stories all the time, you know, these towns where just, you know, it's lockdown, you know. Even in those towns where everybody knows, hey, man, the cops here are out of control, you know, people will still pick up the phone and call 911 for help. You know, when knowing they're inviting trouble into their lives. We're just conditioned to do it, man. We're just conditioned.
I know. So I went into this book with a bit of an axe to grind because my wife at the time was a victim of sexual assault whose investigation had been botched by the local police. Okay? So I needed something to get my mind off of this extremely frustrating situation where we were trying to get a criminal investigation started elsewhere in Ohio and getting pushback from the local cops because they didn't want to do their job. And they had lost all the evidence, you know, so it was embarrassing. They didn't want to do it. And we had to get the Ohio Attorney General's office involved. And so that was my first experience with the kind of institutional problems in Ohio. And so when I found out about Richard Olivito's career, I decided to start this book. But over the process of writing the book, I started to feel a lot of sympathy for cops because the institutional system kind of puts them in a bind. All right, so imagine I'm a cop. I get scared in a moment and I shoot a dog, you know, or I shoot a person. I haven't been well trained, and there's a kind of certain ethos and culture in the police department, and I just made a mistake, and I'm terrified. I know that the system is going to eat me alive. So what do? I need my partner to cover for me. You know, we're on the same side. We're against the bad guys. And so it's natural that he's going to probably help me out. It's not comfortable for him to lie, but he knows that he's doing the right thing for me because I'm a good guy. We work together, you know, and that's the whole problem with police investigating themselves is there's a massive conflict of interest, especially in these small departments where everybody knows each other. The sergeant who does the investigations probably has a nickname and he's boys. They're boys with all these guys, you know, they go drinking together after work. They hear each other's problems. They know each other's families. They're not going to turn on each other. That's just against their whole code, you know. It's called the blue wall or the thin blue line. And it's completely understandable. But that's why you need outside agencies. And you need the federal government. As much as everybody hates the federal government, local authorities always blame the federal government when the federal government gets involved. You know, in Steubenville, they were super angry. You know, they said there's undermining our authority and that these DC-fed people who are, you know, big shots from Yale and stuff don't know what our department needs and blah, blah, blah. But they're, you know, at the end of the process, when the feds are done with them, a lot of these police chiefs are like, well, this is the best thing that ever happened to our department because we needed to make all these changes. We needed funding. And City Hall wouldn't do it because they were constrained and they needed to, you know, please their constituents. Meanwhile, our department was suffering from a lack of resources. But what the federal government brings through the Civil Rights Office and the special litigation section, which does these agreements for reform, is they force the city authorities to deal with the problems that have been festering for a long time.
Have you ever talked to Norm Stamper, the former police chief in Seattle?
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you met him?
I've not talked to him directly, but I read part of his book, and it is fantastic. It's fantastic. The man has a lot of integrity. I respect him a great deal.
Yeah, a whole new view of policing. We need to turn the whole system upside down. And one of the things I've always advocated for, just in my own humble little way here that I can, is we just like we have a jury system where people have to show up for jury duty. You know, okay, everyone also would have to show up for a civilian review board. That every time whenever someone's arrested and they come into a precinct that night or that day, there's a 3-man board there of civilians, just like jury duty, who decide, hey, are we going to cage this guy before he goes before a judge, or maybe, you know, because a lot of times with these cops, they know it's going to get thrown out the next day. The DA is going to throw it out, but you may win in court, but you're going to go for the ride. You're not going to win the ride, the argument about the ride, and they're going to take a man and hold him overnight. And so before that happens, man, a couple of civilians say, hey, is this justified, or the guy was just arguing with a cop, you know?
You know, the system has put authority. They've kind of shuffled it around. They've been like, well, this isn't working. Let's try a different thing. This isn't working. Let's try a different thing. So the Justice Department was actually a shift from the commissions. They were appointing independent commissions to investigate police corruption every 20 years and verifying its existence, and then being like, oh, well, what do we do? I don't know. You know, push it away until it comes up again in a really embarrassing way, and then we'll make another commission. And nothing ever changed, you know. So the Department of Justice was like, okay, we have completely failed at accountability. Let's try this. And this worked, but then, you know, the police unions, who are very, very powerful, have numbers in the millions of paying, you know, of due-paying members, and they hire the best law firms for police accused of misconduct. These are, you know, public sector unions become so powerful that they eradicate the accountability that there needs to be in public sector trade, you know, occupations. Teachers, it's a nightmare. You can't fire them. Police officers, it's a nightmare. You can't fire them. And that's why civilian review boards have started to pop up in over 100 cities around the U.S., probably many more by now. But power has been devolving to the state and local governments because in this age, the federal government is less and less occupied with these kinds of things. But it doesn't mean that they weren't effective. I think, personally, if you have multiple layers of accountability, you're going to be better off, even though you're going to have a kind of bureaucratic system. So when you file a civil rights lawsuit, or you fire a complaint against an officer, these processes can take years to give results, and then the appeals take much more time. You know, but the end of the system, the end of the system's treatment of these cases, often the officers are rehired, you know, and it's kind of like this prolonged slap on the wrist. And then they get all their back pay and their jobs reinstated, and everything's wiped away. But they go through the process. It's almost like with antitrust. You know, they can't really punish Microsoft, but they're going to put them through the ringer for 9 years of litigation fee, and that's the punishment, you know? So officers accused of misconduct, and proven to have committed misconduct, will sometimes go to prison. Rarely, you know? Most of the time they get their job back and their back pay, you know?
Or they're just shifted to another station in another city. They like the Catholic Church. They just go to a different town, get another job as a cop over there. And also, too, these cities could save money on these lawsuits, man, if they just had a better accountability.
So
I know. Like in California, those are like $8 million cases, every one of them. $8-10 million they settle over there.
In Steubenville, they lost their insurance coverage 3 times because of police brutality lawsuits, settlements. And, you know, even these small towns, you know, in a big city, you get like Chicago, $662 million in settlements over, you know, a certain number of years. in a small town, even $1 million in a number of years is an enormous burden on taxpayers. And the taxpayers don't always pay directly. They pay indirectly. They pay to the city, who pays the law firm, or the police union brings in. It's such a web of funding that is hard to figure out. There's insurance firms who are some of the biggest contributors to Supreme Court justice elections. You got law firms, that are defending these police, and they're paid by the insurance firms who are contributing to the Supreme Court justice campaigns, who, it's just a big web of difficult to pick apart, big, deep-pocketed interests that have a vested interest in the status quo not changing.
Yeah, with any kind of system, the smart guys who figure out a way to profit off of it, and make little side deals and come up with money. I was going to ask you, we got to take a commercial break, but when we come back, I'm going to ask you, because I know in big towns, like back in Vegas, one of the money-making avenues they have out of this police mass arrest going on is DUIs and domestic violence. They like to arrest everybody for those kind of charges, and they're automatically arrest for every. You show up for a DUI or domestic violence is automatic arrest. And then the judges have their friends who run these DUI classes and domestic violence classes. They sentence these guys to, and there's all kind of kickback arrangements going on. So I wonder if that kind of stuff was going on down there in Warren and Steubenville as well. Hey, you were saying you had another book you're working on and a screenplay?
2 screenplays. Actually 3. I'm working on so many projects right now. I'm privately, like my own business, I help writers and researchers. Right now I'm helping a narco trafficker write his autobiography, and helping a retired detective write his autobiography, and helping various other people, publish and write small and large works and screenplays. But I also have my own projects. I'm writing a spy thriller about an American spy in Egypt, which is partially based on my own experiences and partially fictitious. And then 2 screenplays. One is the adaptation of Blue Mafia into a series, and the second is a screenplay in Spanish about organized crime.
Excellent. So you definitely got your hands full.
Yeah,
stuff going on.
definitely.
Yeah. Now, you were telling me off the air about the reform. The Department of Justice reform program has been disbanded.
Pretty much, yeah. The Attorney General Jeff Sessions undid a lot of the work of the Department of Justice, and they worked to pull back investigations and reform programs and agreements that were already instituted. And much like you see with the Michael Flynn investigation, they were basically like pulling back the Department of Justice in order to spare their constituents the pain of, the pain and embarrassment of reform. Baltimore, Chicago, Cleveland, various U.S. cities were under consent decree when the Trump administration took office, and over the preceding years, Jeff Sessions undid a lot of that work, and now, as far as I know, the Civil Rights Division isn't investigating any allegations of police misconduct.
Yeah, they were just saying that Barr wants to drop charges against the Russian hackers. Man, people got to know, they didn't just hack the DNC. They hacked Westinghouse. They hacked a whole bunch of people. And he wants to drop those charges, too. That whole investigation. And something about...
It's a massive change of priorities.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. The good place to be right now would be Mexico, right?
Yeah, that's the reason why I'm here.
I'm surprised the Mexicans don't want to build a wall and keep us out, man.
No, that was actually a joke. That was a joke that was happening in Mexico in 2016. You would go to the cash register to pay at the supermarket, and the cashier would say, "Do you want your change, or do you want to donate it to building the wall?"
Oh my God! Yeah, what do they think down there when they see all this craziness going on up here?
Well, they have a saying in Mexico, I'm Mexico, so close to heaven, so far from heaven, yet so close to the United States. Because that's, they're problematic and very important economically. We have a very complicated relationship. It's almost like China, where we kind of hate each other, but like have to be friends and have each other's hands around each other's necks in a way. I think Mexico is like, well, we benefit from the gringos so much, we can't like turn our back on them, but sometimes we really want to try,
And down there again in Warren and Steubenville, were they doing that with those kind of cases, those kind of DUI cases, and constantly just picking people up at the bus stop, riding their bike without a light, that kind of stuff?
All kinds of stuff. They had all kinds of shenanigans going on. I mean, they were so they would arrest people for spurious traffic violations, and in Warren they would strip search them. Like if you were black and you got pulled over for a traffic violation, you got strip searched. Certain officers strip searched everybody they brought in, and frequently it would be a traffic violation that would escalate into something else. Meanwhile, the narcotics squads, oh my goodness, the county narcotics squads are shot through with corruption. In Steubenville, or properly Jefferson County, the narcotics squad was robbing drug dealers, pocketing the proceeds and the drugs, and selling the drugs themselves. So there was a cop whose child was one of the biggest drug dealers in the area, and the father, who was a police officer, or actually he was a Secret Service agent working for the prosecutor's office, much like we see in that Georgia case. And the guy did not have any business being a police officer. He had no training, and his son was a drug dealer, and he was robbing his son's competitors and passing the cocaine to his son to sell. And the prosecutor was involved.
No, did any of them get convicted and charged and convicted for this kind of
Hell
stuff?
no. Hell no. The prosecutor went on to retire happily, and he's playing tennis in Florida probably as we speak. And the narcotics officer eventually lost his job after another like 7 or 8 years of shenanigans. His son finally went to jail for a huge bust. He got busted with meth, weed, coke. The guy was a major trafficker, and his dad was a cop for many years. And there was allegations against him for many years, and the local authorities just turned a blind eye. And the federal government, the Civil Rights Division came in, and they put the whole department under a consent decree. And the chief of police, Jerry McCartney, continued to go around to all of the gambling joints and collect his bribes, even after his department was under federal investigation.
Was there any arrest and charges after this investigation? Was anybody charged?
No.
So this
the Department of Justice. So listen, this is what I was told by the Department of Justice. So back in the 90s, when they were pioneering this method of investigating local authorities in order to reform them, they were pioneering the system. They called it Consent Decree 1.0. The Justice Department during the Obama administration pioneered Consent Decree 2.0. And they did this partially during their investigation into Ferguson, where they went farther than they had ever gone before in checking out what the local courts were doing with their funding and how they were making their money and how much they were getting from traffic fines and against who. Was it mostly black people? Was it some white people? Et cetera, et cetera. And this is the kind of work that didn't happen in Steubenville, because Steubenville was only the second investigation that the Department of Justice ever did of a local police department. And it wasn't until about 10 or 15 years later that they really started to put more teeth in these investigations into kind of corruption. But the thing is, the Special Litigation Division has jurisdiction over complete departments. The criminal section does prosecutions against individual officers. So what happens is the Civil Rights Division comes in and investigates a whole department, and if they find actionable probable cause against certain officers, they may pass that to criminal division. But it's pretty problematic and complicated. So, for example, in New Orleans, Louisiana, New Orleans has one of the most corrupt police forces in the entire country, and basically every other institution is also corrupt, even the public schools. But so the Justice Department came in and investigated the no PD and put him under a consent decree. In the course of that investigation, they found out that a certain cop had a lady who was going to complain about him killed by a drug dealer. Okay? So the cop was involved in a murder for hire, or a hit, basically, which has only happened, as far as I know, about 3 or 4 times around the country. They passed this information to the criminal division of the Department of Justice, and the Department of Justice put this cop away for the rest of his life. But the same thing happened in Warren. A cop who is a narcotics agent and a probation officer who has a brother who is a cop in Youngstown collected $15,000 to have somebody killed for a drug dealer who was their buddy from childhood. And nothing ever happened to those cops. They're still in their same positions today. One of them's name is Andre Peterson. Another's name is Vince Peterson. They were one of them is not a law enforcement officer anymore. I believe the other one is still a probation officer and a narcotics agent. Those guys had somebody killed and collected the money in 1999, and they never got charged because the local prosecutor, who's still in office, is a coward.
I got to tell you, Tim, I had assumed that your book had a happy ending. I was under a misconception there. There's a...
sorry to say, the book does not have a very happy ending.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Because the bad guys win. You know, in Ohio, the bad guys win. Ohio is the state with more federal investigations of police per capita than any other state in the union, except for California and New York, who both have populations way larger than Ohio in one city. Ohio has something very, very, very wrong happening. And
is there any success with civil lawsuits down there?
The FBI have tried to correct it for 20 years, but Ohio officials resist accountability, they resist reform, and they don't want to change their racist ways.
Tim, do they have any success with civil lawsuits down there?
Yeah, they do, but it takes several years. You get some compensation, but none of the things that are leading to these civil lawsuits are ever truly changed. You know, maybe a cop loses a job once in a while in Ohio, but he can just go to the next town over. I mean, you saw that with that guy who killed the little kid in Cleveland. Yeah. After 8 seconds, he got another job in another department. I think it might have been in Ohio, not far from Steubenville, in fact. But that's the kind of mentality that you see in the public authorities there.
So, Tim, we only have a few minutes left, a couple of minutes. What do you want to leave us with?
Well, like Trump said during his campaign, cops are members of our community, and I absolutely agree with this. We really do need to try to have a good relationship with cops in our communities, but the way that cops are held accountable needs to be bolstered and enforced without bias or prejudice. We really need a better system of accountability, because these officers have more power than almost any official in the entire system. They have power over life and death, and many of their actions are unquestioned, you know, because they're made in the split second. And for that reason, we need better training, and we need state and federal authorities to be involved in holding these local police and local officials accountable.
You know, actually, a lot of the atrocities that we're talking about right now, they're trained to do. You know, the training needs to change as well.
Yeah, training absolutely needs to change.
Yeah.
You
I
can't
encourage
shoot
everybody
somebody because they're 15 paces away and happen to have a knife.
Yeah.
You know, you can see the videos. One more thing, American police chiefs have been traveling to the United Kingdom to learn how they kill so few people. And it's partially because their population is less heavily armed than ours. And so our love of guns creates a very difficult problem for our police.
Yeah, but even unarmed civilians getting shot down and killed, if we wanted to reduce that, we could do it right quick. The book is called Blue Mafia, Police Brutality and Consent Decrees in Ohio. The guest is Tim Tolka. You can find him at timtolka.com. Keep an eye out for this man's work. He's got a lot of stuff coming up, 2 new books and a screenplay. He also helps people out if you want to write a book, too. I guess coaching and screenwriting and ghostwriting, I guess they call it co-writing and stuff like that. timtolka.com. That's timtolka.com. Tim, thank you so much, man.
Thank you.
Good night.